Well, welcome everyone to this panel at Boston College Law School's Your Future in Practice program. This program is specifically for admitted students, so I first want to congratulate you on your admission to BC Law, and I hope everyone is well during really what has been such a challenging year. My name is Jen Perrigo. I'm the Assistant Dean for Career Services here at BC, and we're so lucky to have such an incredibly accomplished panel of alumni here today to discuss their experience at BC, their own career paths, and how being a member of the BC law community has really helped them along the way. Before we turn to the panel, I just want to give you some guidelines for our format today. First, just a reminder to the audience that you can see us and hear us, but we cannot see you or hear you. I'm going to pose some questions to the panel, and then we're going to open it up for your questions. To ask a question, just use the Q&A function found in the tools section at the bottom of your screen. I think everyone is very familiar with Zoom at this point. And please note that the program is being recorded for the benefit of those who are not able to attend live with us today. So I'm going to have all the rest of our panelists join us. You can turn your cameras on, you'll appear. Hello. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. So we were going to be joined by two other alumni, and this is the kind of the nature of the business with having such a distinguished panel that they got called away, but certainly their bios are available online, and we're happy to answer any questions. We have such a distinguished panel with us today. We've had wonderful careers. I will introduce them all first, and then I'll have them all each talk about their own career path. First, Judge Ellen Huvelle, retired senior United States District Court Judge, U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. We have John McHale, former Chief Information Officer and Executive Vice President of Administration for Major League Baseball. And Debra Yang, partner Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher, former United States Attorney in Los Angeles. So thank you all so much for being here. My job as a moderator, I always say, is just get out of the way. So all of your stories are what everyone is interested in hearing. So I'm going to go in order by last name. Judge Huvelle, can you tell us briefly about your own career path from BC? You probably don't need reminding, but I just want to remind all the panel that, most of our audience are not lawyers. And so, I certainly didn't even know any lawyers when I was just starting law school. So I always try to remember what that felt like.
Well, unlike you, Jennifer, I knew a lot of lawyers. Can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. I came from Boston. My father was a lawyer. My brother is a lawyer. My husband was a lawyer. My father taught at BC. My brother taught at BC. So, and I went in class, I was the class of 75 along with John McHale. And we were at a different building. You have to sort of imagine that we were at the Thomas More facility, not at the where the law school presently exists. The present facility, which I've seen quite a bit of, is just wonderful. But my career started, after I graduated, I clerked for the head of the SJC in Massachusetts. That's the Supreme Judicial Court. And after that, I actually moved to Washington thinking I would return to Boston, but we never did. I started at a law firm, Williams and Conley, and I was there almost 15 years doing criminal and civil litigation. I then went to almost 10 years in the Superior Court, which is our local court. If we were hypothetically a state, we would have a local state court, but we are not a state, as many people know. And so we had a Superior Court is basically the appointments are by virtue of the President of the United States. But they're Article I judges, not what are called Article III judges. So Article I's do not have life tenure. So 1999 comes around, and I was appointed to the federal judiciary by President Clinton. That was an Article III lifetime appointment, which I just recently basically retired from after 20 plus years. And in the federal court, I did criminal and civil litigation, not family, which I had done before. And the federal court's jurisdiction includes, as everybody will learn when they go to law school, cases between people of different states or civil cases, many of which involve the federal government in DC. We had a lot of litigation, obviously, in the last 4 years that involved actions by the federal government and federal criminal cases. For instance, they're now in that jurisdiction prosecuting the people who rioted and the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So that's where I am now, and that's where I've been.
Thank you. Thank you. So going in alphabetical order, John, how about you? What was your path from BC?
Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon to everybody. And I am also, as is Judge Huvelle, a proud member of the class of 1975. I like to think of myself as having provided the ballast for Judge Huvelle's lofty and preeminent position in our class rankings. I like to think that every good thing that has happened to me professionally has happened because of my time at Boston College Law School. I graduated in the spring of 1975 and went to Washington. I worked for about 5 years for a private-public partnership that was in the process of reorganizing the freight railroads of the Northeast. It was called the Consolidated Rail Corporation, excuse me, Conrail. It was a legislative lobbying type practice, and I stayed at it for about 5 years and then decided I wanted to go west. I moved to Denver and began to practice law there. To the extent that my practice was successful, it was because of the gracious referral of a enormous client who was setting up operations in Colorado for the first time. And the referral was made to me by a BC law grad who was a partner in a big firm in Washington. Because of that client and some other things I was able to do in Denver, I volunteered and spent a good deal of time working for the mayor, trying to keep Denver alive as a Major League Baseball relocation territory or expansion territory. Eventually, the National League announced that it was going to expand. We were successful in our effort to attract an expansion club, and because of my involvement in the effort to make arrangements to build a new stadium, I was asked by the club if I would like to join the club executive staff. I did, and became one of the original executives of the Colorado Rockies Club and worked there for a good number of years. That led to an opportunity to become president of the Detroit Tigers. My birthplace, I moved back to Detroit and worked there for about 8 years, developing a new ballpark there. I spent some time in St. Petersburg as sort of the emergency chief operating officer in an organization whose ownership group was fighting amongst each other. And after a couple of years there, I was invited to come to New York by then Commissioner Seelig, and I have stayed there, worked there for about 20 years in the role that you described, with a variety of fascinating assignments. I left the executive staff of the commissioner's office at the end of the year, and I will remain a contract employee as a hearing officer for on-field disciplinary matters for the next year, after which I expect I will fully retire.
Thank you. Debra.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me today. And I love seeing familiar faces from prior panels. So I actually had the opposite background from our distinguished judge. I had nobody in my family who was a lawyer. So I was the first one who went to law school. And I'm based in Los Angeles, and that's where I was before I came out to BC, but I'd never actually gone to school outside of an hour distance from my home, because that's what my mother told me was approved. And the only reason why she let me go to BC was because it was Catholic. So, I scored some points there. But I've had a very sort of a hopscotchy kind of career. and so I jokingly say to folks, I have career ADD, and I think there may be a grain of truth to that. But I started out after I graduated, I went and I worked at a law firm in Santa Monica, California. And then about a year after that, I moved to Chicago and worked for another law firm. And that's because at the time I thought that was a wise move because of the person that I was dating, but that relationship then ended. So I moved back home to Los Angeles and I clerked for a federal district court judge there. And when I was clerking for the judge, I saw all these AUSAs who assistant United States attorneys and prosecutors who were coming into the courtroom and arguing cases. And I thought, I'd never heard of that position, never thought about it, but I thought they look really like they're pretty together and they're, you know, standing on their feet and making great arguments. And I thought that would be something that I wanted to pursue because I like the skills that I saw developing in a young lawyer. So I then joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I was there as a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles for 7 years. I was in my 30s then, and then I ended up going on the bench. So I became a state court judge in California, first the municipal level and then the Superior Court level, which is our trial court level. And I did that for about 5 years. And then President Bush 43 appointed me to be the United States Attorney in Los Angeles. And for a frame of reference, it was shortly after 9/11. So I took over that job with absolutely no skills in combating terrorism, but quickly learned. And I stayed there and I ran that office for just about 5 years. And then as administrations change, so do US attorneys, and out I went. And at that point in time, I decided to go into private practice. So I joined Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher about 14 years ago now. I can't believe it. It feels like it was yesterday. And I'm generally a litigator. My specialty is white collar defense, but I do civil litigation too, and it covers a myriad of different areas. Yesterday, I was involved in settling a huge case for USC on the sexual assault matter. So I do a lot of work on behalf of universities. But on the same day, I managed to help corral 125 former United States attorneys who wrote an open letter, and it was cited to and published, or it had a link in the AP, basically calling out anti-Asian hate and saying that there's no tolerance for anybody who's come from the Department of Justice for any of that here in this country, and that we wanted to work with others in ways to eradicate that. So it was a long day yesterday. So today, everybody here in this panel is my treat. So thank you, Jen.
Thank you. My goodness. You all have had just such amazing careers. And I know that the folks who are listening, don't always perhaps recognize the names of some of these firms or completely appreciate what a United States Attorney does. Or, I think, John, I think everyone probably recognizes Major League Baseball, but it's really impressive what, all the stages of your career. So I'm eager to hear more about that. But to start with, what was your experience like at BC? And Judge, I'll start with you. How was it?
I was one of the few people, I don't know if John would agree, I thought it was fun. Yeah. We had small classes. I knew probably everybody or close to everybody. There were less than 200 in our class. I knew most of the professors, and it didn't have a cutthroat atmosphere. And I think that's remained the same. I've been on the board of advisors to the dean for, I think it was 15 years, both two deans actually, Dean Huvelle and Dean Garvey. So I kept fairly close contact with the law school, and I still had the same feeling that people knew each other. They appreciated the fact that they had the support of the administration and their fellow students. And it was it was a solid, good education, and I really enjoyed the people. And I think that we generally, had respect for each other, and there was a good environment for both learning, and people had a nice time. So you made friends. And I don't always see that. When you look around at law schools that have large classes, I used to get resumes and letters from teachers, and it was clear they didn't know the student. The student got a good grade in their course, but people at a school like BC, the teachers will really know who you are, and they'll be able to speak about you, which is really critical down the road. I mean, and they will help people, figure out what path to take. You have to appreciate that now the numbers of different paths out there are just exponentially larger than they were. Things were very traditional. People went maybe to law firms, some into government, and the clerkships. They were the basic ways that people pursued a career. John obviously was the exception, and there probably wasn't a male or a female in all of the law school who didn't emulate him for being able to go into sports. But that's true of college kids too. My son is always regretting that he wasn't general manager or something. But now the sky's the limit in terms of the kinds of in-house opportunities, the opportunity in biotechnology, patent work. It's just wildly more exciting in a lot of ways.
Thank you. John, how about you? What was your experience like? And I suspect you both have some stories about each other that I know you're not going to reveal, but I just realized that.
Jen, I as usual, I could not have said it better than Ellen did. My clearest memory from my time at BC Law School has to do with the kindness and helpfulness of my classmates. I would not have finished had that not been the case, both intellectually and emotionally. I think they were just a wonderful group of plus or minus 200 people. And like Ellen, I feel like I knew every one of them and had a relationship with every one of them. The other thing that was so admirable to me about the law school was its sense of public service, its encouragement and its commitment to the kinds of things that make for good and moral government, and that do not necessarily focus on conventional career achievement, but are so necessary for a good and a just society. And the professors that I had at BC were not afraid to talk about that, which was an eye-opening, refreshing, and inspiring thing. I just remember so warmly my time with my classmates and how grateful I still am to each and every one of them that assisted me. And I just believe it was and is a wonderful institution.
Thank you. Deborah, what was your experience like?
So before I came out to Boston, I asked people what it would be like to live in Boston for 3 years of my life. And I remember a very dear friend said to me, "You will thoroughly love being in Boston. It's the home of many intellectuals because of the number of schools and students and professors that just live in the community. You have sort of a heightened discussion, even when you're just at dinner." And I remember that stayed in the back of my head. And then I came out to BC and I met, some of the professors. And I have to say, it was intimidating for me because I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything about Boston, and I didn't know anything about law school. But you had these amazing professors who just, Cynthia Lichtenstein, Frank Upham, Hoteling, for con law. These are all famous professors from BC. But if you could sit in the classroom and listen to them, you knew that they were really teaching you the basics of what it was about their various areas of the law. And it wasn't just that they were teaching you, but they really really liked you as students. And so the engagement felt very personal and very caring. So it's interesting to me that John and the judge have sort of referenced that, because I never stopped to think about it being a BC thing. But as I reflect, I have many friends still from BC. I have many lifelong friends, and it's so strange to say now that we've known each other for 3 decades. That's just so odd to me. But, you know, at the time that I was at school, I didn't realize that the green line, like split off into like different lines themselves, and that they weren't connected. So I got a place to live that was off of the one that's most south. I lived in down on Boylston. Anyway, and so somebody found out that it was taking me over an hour to get home every night because of that mistake that I made. And someone in my class said to me, "Oh, you shouldn't have to, you know, you need time to study. I'll just take you home." And she took me home every day for my freshman year. And I just saw her about a month ago. She's still a very dear friend of mine. And it's just, you know, you meet people like that who are just incredible. But I also think that it opened my mind up because of a lot of other programs that the school had. It had moot court, it had mock trial, it had an Asian affinity group, which I'd never belonged to, never thought of identifying myself that way, but it was really interesting to meet other people that had very sort of like backgrounds to mine, and a place where I felt, you know, there was one place where I could go where it felt very familiar to me. And then there was also an externship that I did down at the state court, and I loved it. I mean, I love being around the judge. I love seeing everything that the judge did. You know, I had judge crush. You know, I thought the judge was so incredibly smart. I saw the way that he would address all the motions that were coming before him, and it just really set the bar for me of a standard of how it was that I wanted to conduct myself as a professional when I left. So I felt like the school sort of educated me in sort of 360 degrees when I kind of came in quite green. So
It's so good to hear that. And I have to say, you know, being here every day, I mean, the place is the same, you know, and I see that, and that certainly makes my job a lot easier, you know, in the career office or the placement office. I mean, in all sorts of ways, you know, the community aspect and students helping students, and also, you know, the whole community kind of pulling together to help one another. You know, it's not very hierarchical in that way, you know,
yeah,
faculty,
yeah,
staff, and students are really, we're all in it together. And
yeah.
yeah, well, and I was going to
No,
say, you know, this kind of whole person thing it really resonates in the career way, because we see it, you know, very individualized advising, you know, like, what do you want to do? What are you good at? And what does the world need? You know, and so we think there's no real, you know, kind of one path to do this. And it's nice to hear, you know, you felt that too, Ben.
yeah, and I think one other thing is that what I really liked about the school is I felt like it had courses that were on cutting edge issues, or cutting edge areas of the law that were developing. And that's sort of like one of the things that I look for whenever I get notices about new professors that are joining, or perhaps professors who went off during the summer and either wrote or researched on, you know, particular areas. I'm always looking to see, you know, as a practitioner, that they're, you know, it's very real. And I really like that. There's a client that I got to know. I used to work for DraftKings, and there's a BC law grad who's over there. And I would say to him, you know, I want to make sure that that the school is, you know, up on what's going on with all the online fantasy sports and sports gaming, because that's an area in which I practice. And I was so happy to hear that he was a guest lecturer at the school. So the school's also great in bringing in, you know, things that are as topical, you know, as of that particular moment. So it's great.
It is great. And it's nice, you know, all the externships and internships that you were referencing and so forth, you know, that can happen during term time, you know, is really helps launch people, helps people figure out what they want to do, and also helps make them more marketable. So that's great to hear. Anything to add, Judge?
You know, Jennifer, in terms of the externships, when I was there, I spent a semester. I had the whole semester working at Legal Aid in Chelsea, which was a wonderful practical experience, and I've been thoroughly impressed by how the students over the years, they often came to the board and made presentations about what they were doing. The Innocence Project, there was a lot of work in immigration, and the students had argued an important case in the field of immigration in the Ninth Circuit. I mean, you don't get to do that all the time and actually be arguing on something that matters to a lot of people. So I've been incredibly impressed by the public service attitude. I mean, John mentioned it, but it's just grown exponentially, and the notion of, experiences to be able to use on the next step. It's the way you learn. What do I want to do, and how can I do it, and whether I'm any good. I also have one reminiscence, and that is of John. I believe when he got to law school, he, like everybody else, although they had long hair, and he had been a football player. You wouldn't believe this now, but John, you could correct me, but you had a really big neck. He had played football in college. It's just, we've all changed a great deal. He now looks like half of himself. You can rebut that, John, if you want.
Ellen, I passed the necks on to my two sons, and I also want to mention that given the variety of professional portfolios our game's general managers have brought recently, I suspect it's not too late for your son if he's still interested.
Well, I'm just going back to the service component you talked about, that is definitely a part of BC law and the community, and kind of, that kind of public service ethos is just, infused in everything. And, whether, no matter which part, which path you take your career, it's nice to hear you all who generally, have, you've both been, Debra and Judge Huvelle, in and out of public service. Nice to see kind of people who model that on a regular basis. It's not like you're choosing one path or the other. So, happy to talk more about that if anyone has any questions. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the network. And I am so happy, Debra, you're sitting in Los Angeles, and John, you're in you just happen to be in Colorado now, and Judge, you're in DC area. That's kind of the silver lining of this Zoom environment we're all in. It's very easy to pull alums from all over the country, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because that's the question I get from a lot of admitted students. What if I don't want to be in Boston? Could you each perhaps talk about how the alumni network has helped you, or how you have helped students coming up? Anybody?
Assuming you're going alphabetically, I don't know. I'm happy.
I know,
not
sorry.
to
Well, I like to mix it up, keep it on you.
Oh, all right, then I'll wait. Yeah.
No, I always talk after the judge.
Me too. Right? Just whatever way you want to do it, we'll do it that way.
The curious thing about networking, it's so much better now than it was. I'm sure when Debra went to Los Angeles, there weren't a lot of people. When I went to DC, there was a small group, and one of our main participant was Father Drynan, who at that point was teaching at Georgetown Law School. And one of the things that happened, you never know what to expect. When you apply to be a judge, it's a highly political process, among other things. And he happened to know our congresswoman, our non-voting congresswoman in the District of Columbia, because they had both been in Congress together. And so he contacted her. In order to get past her, I had to get her to recommend me to the President of the United States and the people in the White House. But I would never have anticipated that would have happened. Now, when I go to BC functions, we have a large contingent here in DC. I don't have the numbers, but I'm sure it's in the hundreds. And they're very loyal. They come to the Christmas parties, and they come to the lectures. And they're very interested, and they have all kinds of careers, especially, people have been in the government in various positions. People have been in the judiciary. We have a couple of judges in the Superior Court who came from BC. So it's a much bigger network. I've had interns, I've had law clerks, I've had people who did externships in my chambers, so that I'm sure all people, who are working someplace are happy. And now there are federal judges from BC. There's one in San Francisco, there's one in Florida, there's one in Hawaii. I would recommend looking at Hawaii someday. It would be a lovely place to be for a year. And one in New Hampshire. So it really has made a difference to watch the sort of national sprouting of the BC alumni.
I think that when...
Oh, go ahead.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, John.
I think that when Ellen and I graduated, BC was a very powerful regional law school. I again echo her experience in Washington. I played my BC card in Ed Markey's office and in Father Drynan's office and got a very, very warm welcome, but there weren't all that many of us down there, at least that I knew about or could find. When I moved to Denver, I think I might have been the only BC law graduate practicing law, and maybe in Colorado for that matter. But I was always very glad to receive resumes or applications or calls or whatever from BC law graduates, because it is a wonderful community of lawyers and judges. And I trust that there are a great many more now that are thriving and being successful here in this state than there were then. I knew a few BC law grads in Detroit. In New York, of course, at this point, there is a powerhouse. There's a great group of very, very prominent lawyers practicing and doing all kinds of things in New York.
Absolutely. Debra.
Yeah, I was going to add that I think for me and what I see now, and I'm at a very large law firm now, and I actually sit on management. And I think the reputation of BC law is very good and very strong. People just know they're going to get great lawyers, and that people are going to be well trained, not just on, in the books, so to speak, but also in other kinds of ways because of the number of programs that come out of it. And so I've only, and as a BC law grad, I've only ever heard positive things. And even when I was applying for a judgeship when I was younger, there's kind of a mystique around it on the West Coast, because there's, to John's point, there's not, there haven't been tons. And of the ones that I know that are in the state, they've all done really well. And so it sort of has fed that same sort of reputation, so to speak. I think it's very different now as far as networking. I get calls from different folks, who want to move to Los Angeles and just need help navigating that and understanding, what are good places, or, where can, I look for jobs, or, do you have any idea about such and such and such and such? And depending on their area of interest, I sort of try to help point them in the right direction. But that's a resource that didn't exist. I was back in this day and age when you had to go to Martindale Hubble and just comb through that and try to figure out the personality and glean where you thought that, they might be interested in you. And it's very different now. And, I find that young lawyers also move around a lot more, at least in Los Angeles and California. Because, and I know Judge Huvelle said something about that earlier, but it's absolutely true, because there's different kinds of opportunities. Lawyers are everywhere now. And in fact, I have 3 daughters, and I keep telling them, go to law school. You don't have to necessarily practice law, because many lawyers that I know don't. But, I live near the Silicon Beach, and the Silicon Valley. And so there's lots of people who go into the tech world. I live in the entertainment capital of the United States, and there's many lawyers who go and work there. And then they sort of transition into some, other kinds of jobs that are non-legal by nature. So there's, tons of not-for-profits. There's makeup companies in Los Angeles, and lawyers go and work there. Early stage sort of general counsels at a very young age. There's a woman that I know who went to Red Bull and was the general counsel there, and I think she'd only been a lawyer for 4 years. So there's those kinds of opportunities, I think, that exist for people now.
Absolutely. There's so many different types of opportunities. And I think both Deborah, you just mentioned it, and also Judge, that you know, it's not as uncommon for someone to go right into business, you know, as it was, you know, 10 years ago. And it's a great launch. You know, one thing I had heard before I started, you know, about the BC Law Network, this kind of mystique that you were talking about, Deborah, you know, kind of the farther away you go, the more powerful it is, you know, and I found that when I refer students out to LA or DC or other places, you know, if it is a smaller group by the numbers, they tend to kind of wrap their arms around the students when they come and give them a warm welcome. So, you know, again, that makes my job easier, and the network is incredibly powerful. We have a couple of questions. Well, we have at least one, well, we have two questions. So I would love to just jump in and talk about what the audience wants to talk about, if you don't mind. First of all, is there something in particular that you wish you knew prior to attending law school that you would suggest a prospective student consider? That's a great question. Anyone really? Deborah, you look like you have a.
Yeah, I think that's one thing. The one thing about the law is that the law can go, as we were just saying, in lots of different directions. And so I've encouraged, you know, people who are either graduating from college or have graduated from college who are thinking about it, don't think you have to have a certain kind of background. You don't. You could have been, you know, interested in botany and still make a fantastic lawyer, because I've met people from all walks of life with lots of different varied interests. And they sort of come into that and they bring that with them. And sometimes they go back to it in their legal professional world life, or they don't. I think one thing that, you know, if you're interested at all, potentially, and you may not know early, but if you're interested in things like litigation, once COVID is over, if you have the opportunity, you know, I would recommend you go in and just sit in a courtroom somewhere and just watch what happens, because it is very different and it feels very different, but you'll kind of understand why people are teaching you the kinds of things that they're teaching you, like evidence, and what the actual real relevance of that is. And you don't have to be an expert. It's just something that's sort of nice to expose yourself to.
Great advice. Judge.
Yes, it seems to, it's hard to say that it's something I would have liked to have known before I went, but as a personality trait, I would have been happier being less risk adverse. And that means that you sort of go with the flow. Doesn't really matter what courses you take. I don't think it matters whether the professor is really good and you're enjoying what you're learning. And the more experiences that you're lucky enough to have, the more you learn, but you get to make decisions based on that. It just, the traditional trajectory used to be people went into law firms, mainly in Boston and the New England area, and you didn't think about other things that much. I mean, I sort of fell into a judgeship, frankly, when somebody was at a party about Christmas time and said they're looking for new judges in the Superior Court. Why don't you apply? And the application was due in a week, which wasn't so easy. But that's what led me then to the federal court. Had I said, oh, you know, I shouldn't do that now, it's not the right time in my career, I've just made partner in a law firm. But you should be ready and willing to take advantage of the opportunities that come to you, and many of them you will seek out. So it's important that you decide that you're gonna, you know, put your toes in a lot of different ponds before you sort of settle down. And some people never do settle down. I mean, they do so many different things. So it would, I would have been happier in life had I not sort of said, well, I'm in a law firm, I can make partner, I should make partner, blah, 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 goes on like that. It turns out that there are lots of roads and you can take more than one road.
Absolutely, such good advice. We have a number of other questions. John, do you mind if I move on? I know we didn't
Go
get
ahead.
2 cents. Okay. Another question we have is, how is the culture in Boston? I'm from the Bay Area, Northern California. Am I in for a culture shock? And I think I'm going to throw that one to Deborah, just because you being from
Yeah,
yeah.
you're in for a treat. Boston is a fantastic town. The ability to get on the T and have mass transportation available and get all around the city to, downtown, to the water, over to, the other side of the river is fantastic. So you'll love that. You'll also love it because it's kind of, imagine sort of like San Francisco, a little flattened down, where there's lots of neighborhoods that you can visit, that are fun, that are filled with restaurants and other kinds of places for us to hang out in when we can congregate again. And then on top of that, there's lots of other kinds of things. There's an amazing museum over at Harvard. There's just a lot going on in the city because of the sports teams are fantastic. I mean, I saw hockey games for the first time in my life when I lived in Boston. I saw the Celtics play, and I just sort of enjoyed all aspects of Boston. I used to take my con law book to the baseball games, and for the first time, I'd never seen this in California. I didn't realize that when it starts to rain, that they just cover the field with a tarp, and then they like wipe it all off, and so the games actually take longer. That's why I started taking my con law books. But I'd never seen that in Los Angeles because we'd never had rain in any of the games that I went to. So I think you'll love it and you'll enjoy it. It is very diverse in Boston. It has a big mix of cultures. So lots of different kinds of ethnic foods. And yeah, I mean, I have 3 daughters, and one of them is thinking of going to graduate school. And I've been telling her to go to Boston because it's the place to be. You got to have it at some point in your life. So
I think that is so helpful. One thing that I would add too is something you mentioned earlier about it being a very intellectual city. Someone told me there were 100 colleges and universities here, and so it's so, there's so many people here from other places doing such interesting things, and many of them end up staying, or you meet them in all these places that you just mentioned. So it's a great, great city. Okay. I have one that I could probably answer, but I think that, I would love to answer it on air here, and it kind of goes to this question. Thank you all. I have seen that about 60% of BC law grads take jobs in Boston. Are OCIs heavily concentrated with firms based in Boston? And I'm going to speak to this, but then any of you, please feel free to jump in. I see a mix. Boston, speaking of Boston, a very vibrant legal community. And certainly within the past 10 years, there have been lots of national and international firms coming to Boston to set up offices because of the interesting amount of legal work here, because of biotech and tech and other areas. And so we have seen the market really grow in that way. So yes, in that there are a number of Boston offices of firms that recruit at BC Law. But they are national or international firms, and so as Deborah said, people move around a lot and so forth. So it is not uncommon for a BC student to say, look, I'm interviewing with, let's just say Jones Day or something, here, but I'm interested in your DC office. Then you are interviewing for that office too. So it's really, our OCI is really, a gateway for many of these firms. And I say firms for OCI because OCI are on-campus interviewing process. There are a lot of large employers, so large law firms, large government agencies, large DA's offices, and so forth. So, yeah, and now, but to answer your question, most of them stay in Boston. I have found that many of them don't necessarily intend to stay in Boston, but because of this community feel and the network and the, they've made some relationships here. They've met a lot of people. They've kind of put down roots over the, over 3 years here, that they end up wanting to stay. So, I mean, happy to talk to you offline about various examples, but that's what I would say about that question. Anyone else talk about, do your classmates stay in Boston largely, or do they go all over? Anybody?
So the ones that I remember, and I was friends with, they all left. And maybe that was a self-selected crowd. I never thought about that. I had some that stayed in Boston. I still have some that are still there, but many of my colleagues left. They went down to DC. A number of them actually ended up working in New York. And then there was a huge cadre. I shouldn't say huge, but there were like a good 10 of us that came out to California. And it was so funny. While we were in law school, some of us would hang out with each other, but not everybody. But when we studied for the bar, we all sat together and we all got each other through that. So we wanted to bat 10 for 10.
Judge, you were going to say something, you went off mute.
Yeah, I can only speak about Washington because I see the big firms here are obviously national or international firms. And I don't think, as far as I can tell, there is any large firm in Washington that does not have some BC people. I noticed the other day there's somebody at Hogan and Hartson that's a high-level person who went to BC. A woman just got appointed to a high-level job in the administration by President Biden, who her last name is Terrell, I think, who had been in the government. There are a fair number of people who work at the Senate or the House and have been there for a good long time. But I don't, and there are a couple of people at Covington where my husband was, and certainly a couple at Wilmer, and some of them are in Boston and some of them are in DC. Bridget Benitez is over at Steptoe. I just talked to her the other day. So there's somebody, at least somebody everywhere that you look at, any firm you look at that has a fair number of people in it. It's not so unusual anymore. The words don't, people know the firm and they know people who've worked there and have done a good job. There's a BC partner at Williams and Connolly who will be happy to talk to Lance Wade, be happy to talk to people. I've sent him people. So you'll find people practicing, at least in Washington, just about anywhere you can think of.
Absolutely. And by the numbers, the second biggest market is New York City, and then flip-flops between California generally and DC. So just to give you a sense of that. John, did you have anything to add?
Not really, Jen. My
Okay.
currency really is from New York. And as you say, there are loads and loads of excellent lawyers from BC and all kinds of firms in New York. Absolutely.
Well, this is a great question. What are your perspectives on the post-COVID job market for lawyers? Will this be something like previous economic cycles that you may have experienced in terms of law jobs? And I would love to hear your answer to this. I'm asked this question all the time, and I wish I had a crystal ball. And any of you, Debra, maybe on the Parliament Committee, you could speak to this.
Sure. It's interesting because most law firms haven't really seen a drop in revenue, which that's very telling. It's a reflection of something. And if you look at the market right now, it's still very robust. I think what's happened is some companies have just sort of, because they're all working from home and it's not sort of the normal thing. I think there's been some hiring that's been held in abeyance, but it hasn't really happened to law firms. Of the programs that I know, everybody, they've been moving along as if it were non-COVID. So I think that's a good thing. If there is some type of reaction or slowness in the marketplace, I think that's probably will manifest itself relatively quickly. We saw that before during the financial crisis, and really that happened in one cycle. And, basically what I counseled young people to do is just keep yourself active, keep your resume active. And if you have to take a job that, is not the first choice, you should still do that just so that you're still resume building. And then, after we sort of spin out of that, realign if you need to. And, these days, I think statistic is that a young professional will move as many as 7 to 9 times in their professional life. So, I don't think moving is viewed in the same way as it might have been back when I first started out, where, you kind of went to one law firm and stayed there for the rest of your life. That's not the case anymore at all.
Great advice. Yeah, I mean, we just had a very robust OCI program, on-campus interviewing program. I think lawyers in general have really transitioned very easily to this remote world that we're in, and very quickly. And so I think if you would have asked me this question a year ago, lots of people were asking me this question a year ago. I think maybe, I had a very different answer. I was very cautious. I was very nervous, and so I've really been pleasantly surprised at how robust, hiring has been. Debra, you talked a little bit about aversion to risk. We haven't seen that as much with larger law firms, but small and mid-sized firms, the hiring is not necessarily contracted, but in abeyance, as you've said. And then others, some of our business employers have seen, look, this is to hire a new grad, for example, can be a very cost-effective way. If your budget got hit, and you still have the work to do to get this kind of legal work done. So sometimes it results in new opportunities for our students. So the other thing I would say is that with some COVID relief money that has come out, some nonprofits and so forth have been able to create new positions. So for example, lots and lots of lawyers were hired because of the eviction crisis. We have a faculty member, Pat McCoy, who used to work for the CFPB, and she had mentioned that there's lots of hiring going on there now. So for a variety of reasons, I think it's still a very robust hiring market. And in our office, we really want to make sure that we look at every sector and every practice area. And as I've said before, try to keep our hand on the pulse of the market so we can direct students where the opportunities are. All right, we have such an engaged group here. I don't want to spend too much time on one. Let's see. This is a very practical question. How often were you realistically able to get into Boston from BC? I know it's a bit of a trek. I live locally and I know the Green Line can really slow things down, but I'd love to still feel the city is accessible. I mean, I think it's a pretty, with some people, I can tell you that with COVID, the traffic is easy. So I don't know if we'll spend too much time on that. People take Uber down and so forth. I mean, and it depends on where you live, certainly. But I think people still get into Boston. The career office we host, when we're all together, we're able to host lots of events in Boston at law firms and other places. So we stay very closely connected.
Jen, one of the wonderful parts of being in Boston was that you learn a whole new level of driving skill. The Darwinian, driving is a wonderful experience.
Well, John, this question is for you. What advice do you have for young law students trying to break into sports law? And how did BC prepare you to succeed as a VP at MLB?
It's pretty easy to describe the way it prepared me to succeed is that you're going to get knocked down, and when you get knocked down, get up again and go after it. I think that our industry is going to be very soft for a year or two since we took such a blow last year. Much will depend on how successful the 2021 season is. And I think this is probably true across sports. The very best way that I can suggest to transition is to work for a firm that has a substantial engagement with the local or the sports team that you're interested in following, or work for a significant partner, commercial partner, or sponsor of a team, so that you can become exposed to the executive staff of that team. And those are the most traditional ways to get an entree into professional sports. There are lots of different paths into our game, but those probably are the two most reliable for skilled young lawyers.
Thank you. This is a very interesting question. Another thank you for taking the time to speak to them today. What non-public interest clerkship, or what about career options for kind of non-traditional careers, non-traditional paths? How many people from when you were in school didn't go to a traditional, go through OCI and then get a firm job? Can you reflect on your experiences, and were there folks who did not take this type of path? And say about their
it's not so much back then when I graduated, but I see now that first off, many companies are now hiring younger lawyers. They've just decided, based on their constant need, that it's good to get folks on board quickly. So I've seen them starting to hire directly from law school programs. So that's one big change. I also think that a lot of folks sometimes go directly into NGOs because they're going to get a different kind of exposure and experience, and then they either stay there or they move from there. But I don't know that I see it directly out of law school per se, like this great change. Where I see it is really in the once associates start to hit sort of the 3 to, what do they call it? It's like 3 to 8, 7 year zone. That they sort of call themselves like the golden stage or whatever, because everybody wants them. And so companies want them, smaller law firms want them. Government wants them. Judges now, when I clerked, the judges took them right out of law school. And now I know from a number of my friends on the bench that they like to have people who have some years of experience under their belt. I don't know, Judge Huvelle can sort of address that, but there's just lots of different kinds of movement now that I see. So I talked to a guy yesterday at a tech company, and he's only been out for 7 years and it's his 3rd job. So I think that's the kind of movement that I see.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the numbers are smaller, certainly, but, we really help encourage people to pursue their own path. And I think that's something that we find really important at BC. Certain opportunities, I think, to have a little bit of law practice or practical experience is helpful to give you kind of a credential. And then, when you move on, as Debra was saying. But, for example, a graduate last year, she wanted to be a legal journalist, kind of an advocate in that way. And she received a fellowship. And so, we in the career office, at least, help people identify fellowships or other opportunities to help them, create their own job almost, if you could put it that way. So, yes, we're happy to, brainstorm with folks to help them find the non-traditional path. But, I would recognize that sometimes that more kind of traditional path will make you more marketable to your dream job after. Judge?
Jennifer, I was just going to pick up where Debra left off. I, for one, have never hired people directly out of law school. A lot of them either go to other clerkships or else go to a law firm. And the law firm, even if you have no intent to stay, can teach you some basic skills about getting along in the world and how to practice law. And there are lots of people that then leave and do quite different things. Even back, way back when, in the dark ages, when I was in law school, there was one guy who became number 2 at Fidelity. And I don't know what career path he took at the beginning, but certainly, and there was somebody else that went to Liberty Mutual, and they either became general counsel or vice president or did business. So there are endless opportunities. And in Boston, certainly the financial sector, along with the biotech sector, is just booming. And I would think that the job market generally is just about to pick up again. And the mere fact that the people sitting in your audience I understand that 20% more applicants than ever before tell you that people feel that at least in the very short term, there's going to be a healthy need for lawyers. And often you need, in policy jobs, you need lawyers. In, business jobs, you need lawyers. One of our graduates went on to found Peloton. I mean, how good could that be?
It's terrific. And, it's actually interesting. You're talking about, the application pool being up. I mean, I think there's another question that came in. Do you have any advice for law students seeking public interest law, not big law route? What things at BC should be taken advantage of for this path? I mean, we find that there are a lot of people who have been inspired to come to law school now, and it is wonderful. So, I mean, just very briefly, today the public interest community, part of this is that we really try to create a community, understanding that students who are interested in public interest or public sector work sometimes have the hardest path you know, because you feel like, you know, there's so many of your classmates taking another route. So we work really hard to welcome those folks very early. We have a public interest law retreat that we hold every year, primarily for 1Ls, but we get the whole community, you know, alumni, faculty, the dean, the career office, to really welcome these folks, to expose them to different types of opportunities. And we've continued that during COVID. You know, we just had our Public Interest Law Foundation, which is a student group, works with us very closely. We just had a PILF alumni happy hour through electronically, you know, through Remo. We had an immigration law networking event. We have tons of programs about how to afford your public interest career. We have a federal government networking event coming up soon. So the list goes on and on and on. It's almost as if we have to and we want to create more programming to encourage public interest law students to keep pursuing their path.
I think you should mention the number of people that went to BC who became politicians. I mean, some, you know, got there in different ways, but Markey went to BC, Kerry went to BC. There's a Congressman Scott from Virginia who went to BC. I think Keith Ellison in Minnesota, who's prosecuting the policeman, I think he went to BC, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, but it's a wonderful entree to politics. And BC is known countrywide for its large number. And the other thing is the Rappaport Center at the law school. A large grant was given, and they do a lot in terms of trying to identify problems, societal problems, public problems, and systemic governmental problems, and trying to solve them. And I think that there's probably as much emphasis on politics, policy, and public interest as there is anywhere.
Yeah, it's terrific. I see that we're at time, and I want to respect everyone's time. And I know that our attendees are going to be going to a networking reception, which is terrific after this. So I just want to thank you all so much. I know you're incredibly busy. We're so lucky to, you know, have you part of this community. And I would just say to the office, or to the audience, that please feel free to contact me or any of my colleagues in the career office, or Dean McHale, who's in the admissions office. You know, either of us or any member of our team are happy to answer your questions. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.